On a misty July morning in 1804, two men stood facing each other on the cliffs of Weehawken, New Jersey. One was Aaron Burr, the Vice President of the United States. The other was Alexander Hamilton, the former Secretary of the Treasury. One would not leave the dueling grounds alive. The location was chosen deliberately. Dueling was illegal in New York, but New Jersey's laws were more lenient. The spot was well known amongst duelists, a secluded ledge above the Hudson River, which happens to be the same place where Hamilton's son, Philip, had died in a duel just 3 years earlier. Philip Hamilton died at the age of 19 when he was fatally shot in a duel with New York lawyer George Ecker. In a speech, Ecker reportedly said that Alexander Hamilton would not be opposed to overthrowing Thomas Jefferson's presidency by force. Philip was defending his father's honor in this duel. George Ecker died 3 years later of consumption. The night before the duel, Alexander Hamilton wrote 2 letters, one to his wife, Elizabeth, expressing his deep love for her and their children. The second contained his final wishes and a statement explaining his position on the duel. I have resolved, if our interview is conducted in the usual manner, and it pleases God to give me the opportunity to reserve and throw away my first fire, and I have thoughts even of reserving my second fire. At dawn, July 11th, Hamilton and Burr arrived separately by boat. Their seconds, trusted friends, who would oversee the duel, measured the pacing distance, 10 full paces. The weapons were inspected, matching .56 caliber dueling pistols. According to multiple accounts, Hamilton first fired his bullet, striking a tree branch above Burr's head. Whether this was intentional, following his stated plan to waste his shot in his letter, or was it simply a miss, remains a debate by historians still to this day. Burr took aim and fired. His bullet struck Hamilton in the right hip, shattering bone and lodging in his organs. Hamilton was transported back across the Hudson to his friend William Bayard's house in Manhattan. Dr. David Hosack, who had waited nearby during the duel, attended to him, but the wounds were fatal. For 31 hours, Hamilton drifted in and out of consciousness. His wife, Elizabeth, and their children gathered at his bedside. He requested communion from Episcopal Bishop Benjamin Moore, making peace with his God in his final hours. At 2 p.m. on July 12th, Alexander Hamilton died with Elizabeth at his side. He was 47 years old. His last words were reported to be, "Remember, my Eliza, you are a Christian." The city of New York went into mourning. Flags flew at half-mast. Businesses closed. Church bells tolled. On July 14th, thousands lined the streets as Hamilton's funeral procession made its way to Trinity Church. By the showing of groups and individuals that were part of the procession, you could see how loved Hamilton was in New York. During the 2-hour procession march, there was continuous artillery fire from City Hall Park, as well as gunfire from both British and French ships in the harbor, along with cannon fire from forts around the harbor. In addition, people lined up along the streets and peered out of windows as spectators. Once the procession arrived at Trinity Church, Governor Morris delivered the eulogy, saying to his friends, "You all know how he perished. On this last scene I cannot. I must not dwell. I might excite emotion too strong for your better judgment. Suffer me only to say that he was too honest to be rich, too proud to be vain, too magnanimous to seek revenge, too warm in affection to be happy." After Governor Morris's eulogy, the coffin was carried over to the churchyard, where the troops formed a hollow square around the grave. Reverend Benjamin Moore, who was Trinity's rector at the time, performed the funeral service from the Book of Common Prayer, and 3 musket volleys were fired over the grave to mark the conclusion of the funeral. As a token of Elizabeth's love, she wore a mourning ring that contained a locket of Alexander's hair. This rare artifact is still owned by the family. Elizabeth would live another 50 years, working tirelessly to preserve her husband's legacy. She established the first private orphanage in New York City and helped to raise money for the Washington Monument. In February 1807, former Vice President Burr was arrested on President Jefferson's orders and charged and indicted for treason. Aaron Burr was tried for treason in 1807 after being accused of conspiring to separate the western United States from the Atlantic states. The trial took place in Richmond, Virginia, and was presided over by Chief Justice John Marshall. Burr was acquitted. Burr hanged and burned in effigies across America, and several states filed additional charges against him. He fled to Europe, but returned to America after 4 years in exile. He lived out the rest of his life in relative obscurity. He returned to New York in 1812 and practiced law. He married a wealthy widow, Elizabeth Brown Jamel, in 1833. But he spent much of her fortune within a year. Eventually, she sued for divorce on grounds of adultery, and a divorce decree was granted on September 14th, 1836, the day Burr died. Burr spent his last days reclusively on Staten Island, New York. He died in a boarding house on September 14th, 1836. His funeral services were lightly attended. The New Jersey dueling grounds became a park. Over the years, there have been several memorials to the famous duel. Presently, there are memorial markers, a bust of Hamilton, and a rock where Hamilton is thought to have laid his head. Today, Alexander Hamilton's grave in Trinity Church Cemetery remains a popular destination for visitors. His death marked not just the end of a remarkable life, but the close of an era in American politics. The practice of dueling, which had claimed both father and son, would gradually decline in the northern states. Thank you for joining us. Please check out all our famous funeral videos, along with our famous family series.